Today is May 6, 2012. We are here in Scarsdale, New York on behalf of the West Point Center for Oral History with Mr. Tony Rabasco. Thank you for being here today. How are you?
I'm fine.
Now, for the record, could you please spell your last name?
My name is Anthony Rabasco. That's R-A-B-A-S-C-O.
Now, as a decorated war veteran from the conflict in Korea, we'd love to hear your story today. But I would like to start from the beginning. Where are you from? Where were you born?
I was born in Mount Vernon, New York. And my folks, there were immigrants that came from Italy, and we resided in Mount Vernon. I was born in Mount Vernon. I went to school in Mount Vernon, and during the elementary school, junior high school, and high school, I graduated from Edison High School, which is electrical trade school, and a year afterwards, I signed myself into the military service. And I graduated in 1947 in Edison High School, and I went into the military service in 1948.
What was your childhood like?
Well, our folks didn't believe in their children having a summer vacation, so evidently our folks, every year my mom had me lined up working with different people. When I was a young boy, I used to deliver ice on a horse and wagon, and at that time we delivered ice. It was 5, 10, 15 cents, and we had to walk up 2, 3 flights to bring the ice. I was paid 25 cents a day, but I enjoyed it because I was working with a fellow who had a horse. And after that, my mom had me work in a delicatessen, and what I did, I stocked cases of soda, I cleaned the cases out, I stocked canned food and so forth, and I peeled potatoes, maybe 2 Army big cans of potatoes. We used to make what do you call potato salad, German potato salad. And then my mom got me into have a paper route, and she posted a $25 bond, and where I had 132 customers, and I used to deliver papers. At that time, I was about 15, 16 years old.
You were a hard-working young man. Now, I understand you were also working at Mount Vernon train station as a young boy as well.
That's correct. I used to shine shoes at 10 cents a shine, and we used to do a lot of the people running on the racetrack used to come, and what we did, I used to shine shoes and make 10 cents, and the money I earned, I used to turn it over to my mother. If I made 80 cents, I would hand her 80 cents, and she would give me a dime or a quarter, that way able to spend for the weekend if I had to go to a movie, whatever it was, and so forth.
How did those experiences, working very hard as a young man, shape your character throughout the rest of your life?
You know, as a young boy, my mom used to say to me, make sure you cut the wood before your father came home. So I used to put my sister on a horse and with a saw. I used to cut wood. I think because I was physically strong, I was a pretty strong boy, I was able to withstand the cold weather and having less meals, water and so forth, you know.
You were toughened up from a young age.
I was pretty tough. I was toughened up, yes. I think that helped a lot.
Now, how did you find your way into the U.S. military? I understand that you went after graduating high school, correct?
When I graduated high school, I signed myself up with the 101st Signal Battalion. Evidently, I went into pole line construction. I liked it a lot, but I liked climbing with the gaffs, climbing poles. We used to climb the poles in the courtyard, maybe about 20 poles in the courtyard, where we used to throw bean bags at one another, and so we had no fear that we would catch it. Then if you missed the bag, you come down the pole, and then you climb up the pole again, and you start all over again. But I liked it. It was exciting. Then I went for physical ed. what they did, they used to have 6 men on a telephone pole with tongs, ice tongs, and we used to walk the whole length of the football field and turn around and come back. And I said, well, I'm going to get out of this thing. This is too much. So what I did, I went into telephone teletype, and I didn't stay much.
What is telephone teletype? Can you tell me a bit more about that?
Well, we string telephone lines, and if you have a field phone, a EA, that you would crank it, I'd be able to talk to you from wire to wire.
Okay, sure.
Now, then I went into Amtrak radio, and Amtrak radio, what it is, if you have a field phone, you crank it, I could talk to you from wire to wire. Now you're on the other side of the mountain, there is no wire between you and I. And this telephone conversation will go through a central switchboard into a carrier unit, transmitted in the air, that's where I would be, and we will receive it, and then we send it to another carrier unit to be demodulated. Then you pick up the phone, I'll be able to talk to you, and you hear the conversation.
Now this is all the training you received on initially joining the military?
That's correct.
Going into the Signal Corps,
yes,
correct?
And then evidently our equipment was supposed to be all in the van. It was supposed to be mobile. What happened, we were supposed to have 5 men to a radio team. It didn't happen that way. When we were supposed to have a base camp with 2 men at the bottom of the mountain and 3 men on the top of the mountain. That's where I was. And they were supposed to bring the provisions, the water, and the food up to us. We were moving so fast, so rapid, that we were only 3 men to a radio team. Evidently, I do not know anybody in the military. The only person I know was the 2 fellows that were with me.
Now, what decision led you to join the military?
Well, I was an electrician. I wanted to learn more about electricity and communications. Sure. I was more interested in it. And I thought by going to the military service, I would gain more, which I should have stood in communications. What I did, I got out of it, and I went to become an electrician. And I got my master's license when I was 22 years old. So I came out of the service.
When you begin to think about joining the military, you were attracted to the Signal Corps in particular as a result of this. What was your training like? Where did you train at once you joined?
Well, we went to school at Camp Drum, New York. We went to school in Camp in Georgia, Camp Gordon, in Georgia. But we did only a short time. We were evacuated and then shipped overseas immediately. We weren't too long in the States.
And this was, I assume, because the Korean War had broken out.
That's correct.
When did you first hear about Korea? And had you heard of it before the war?
I didn't know where Korea was until I came back to the United States. Then I saw it on the map. Then I realized...
You didn't know where it was until you came back from the conflict.
That's correct. I had no idea where Korea was. We didn't have television at that time. Just the radio and newspapers. So I had no idea where it was.
What was the first you heard about the war? The very first memory you can think?
Well, when I arrived in Japan, I was going to school in Tokyo, and we were only there for 3 weeks, and then we were shipped directly to Korea. So we had to learn how to dismantle our equipment, carry our equipment on a strap back, which was with like a leather belt. It was like 2 leather belts, you know. But then we used the A-frame, which was much easier to carry our radio transmitter, which weighed 55 pounds at that time.
Now, when you were in Tokyo, did you realize the severity of the war, how serious the conflict was in Korea at that point?
No.
Because this is 1951 when you're in Tokyo, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And so
in January 51, yes.
Okay. So
that's when, and then from there I went straight to Korea.
Now, did you realize how serious? I mean, this was a major conflict. Were you, upon hearing that you were going to be sent to Korea, were you fearful at all, or were you confident at your role that you'd been trained to do?
I was an outdoorsman, and I didn't mind sleeping outdoors, so it didn't bother me. But other fellas, which was true, they broke down, and they had a breakdown, and they were taken off on my radio team, yes. They couldn't take the pressure.
Did that affect you at all?
Well, no, it didn't affect me. But when you're alone, you do many foolish things when you're alone. And the first thing you do, you mimic to yourself to hear a voice, see if you're still alive. The next thing you do as a human being, you say to yourself, what am I supposed to do? What am I supposed to do? Because we're ambushed constantly by the Chinese. The next thing you do as a human being, you urinate by 10 or 20 times a day just to occupy yourself. You can't wait for daybreak to come. So evidently, your body is breaking down slowly, gradually, but you're not realizing. You think you're physically strong, but you're not. Eventually, it works on you. It works on you, especially when the winter was treacherous. We didn't have the proper clothing. We didn't have the proper shoes. We didn't have the proper sleeping bag. When I go to West Point, I talk to the cadets. I tell the cadets the type of clothing that we had, the type of boots that we had, and the type of sleeping bag we had. Now, our boots was a double leather strap buckle. It was not thermal. It was not made for that frigid weather. Our clothing was, we had long johns, half long johns, with a, woolen pants over the long johns, with a pair of field pants over the woolen pants, which was supposed to be water repellent. Our sleeping bag was a canvas with an army blanket inserted inside. So it was not made for that frigid weather. When I made the Inchon landing, when we hit the beach, I slept in an abandoned freight car. Then we regrouped, and then we moved up to north central part of Korea.
What was that advance like when you came on land at Inchon? What was your first experience?
Well, it was total level to the ground. There was no buildings, nothing there, no vegetation, and what happened? We replaced the 561st signal, which was attached to the 1st Cavalry, which was wiped out. We took their place.
And they'd already advanced up into North Central Korea?
Yes, I was then with the 24th Division. As the line moved, I moved with the line.
Did you pass through Seoul during the Battle of Seoul after?
Yes.
What did Seoul look like at that point?
It was total to the ground. There was no buildings. It was all bombed out.
Were there many Korean citizens around, or had everybody fled in the wake of the battle?
Well, the peasants, they walked for miles and miles and miles just with what they had on them. Whatever food they carried, that's all they had with them. And they would go miles and miles with carts and so forth. And evidently, I was assigned with the 1st Marine Division along the Han River. The river was frozen, total. 2.5-ton trucks would go right across the riverbed. That's how cold and frigid the weather was. I was with the 19th Turkish Brigade. I supplied radio communications for the 19th Turkish Brigade. I supplied radio communications for the 6th Rock Infantry Division. During, I would say around April, May, when the Chinese broke through the lines, we retreated 60 miles in 2.5 days by foot. And what happened, a friend of mine, Kenny Clinchy, who radioed to my radio station since Rabasco, we're on the retreat. He said, we have to pull out. I never seen him. And evidently, I had no knowledge. I never seen him since then or heard from him anymore. We went south all the way down to Chuncheon, where we regrouped, and we went back up the front lines. Because of that incident, the you picture this area as an ammo dump. We had thousands and thousands, 3 tiers of drums of gasoline stacked high in the air that we set fire thousands and thousands of gallons of gasoline.
And this is in the wake of the Chinese advance.
Yes, so the Chinese would not recover the gas. We set fire vehicles that needed minor repair. We took 50-gallon drums of gasoline and we poured them in all the wells to contaminate the water so the Chinese wouldn't drink it. About 15 years ago, I sent my documentation in to the Korean government. The Korean government gave my wife and I 5 days free lodging. When I arrived in Korea, I met a young boy who was with his mother. He was about 40 years old, and his mother was an Army nurse. And he taught history to the 5th and 6th grade students in Portland, Oregon. And he said, "We'd like to hear from you veterans." And I said, "When I come back to the United States, I would be glad to write something for you." So when I came home, I wrote him an 8 by 10 page, and I mailed it to him. Then he writes back to me, and he says, "There's more to it." So I wrote another 2 more pages. In the meantime, my son read the thing, and he says, "Pop, you know, your punctuations are no good. I'm going to redo it on the computer for you." And I wrote the story about a memoir of a lone soldier. I wrote about myself, how we survived those treacherous winters and what we did. In the meantime, I met the Turkish soldiers and I spoke to their interpreter. I said, "You know, I supplied radio communications for the 19th Turkish Brigade." They were so happy. They would kiss me on this cheek, they'd kiss me on the other cheek. Then he took a pin off his jacket and pinned it on my jacket, which I have today, a Turkish veteran's pin. Then I met a colonel from the United Kingdom. And I said, "Colonel, there's something stuck in my mind. I didn't know where it was." So I described it to him. I said there was a mountain with a pass, with a river running through the pass, with a railroad right alongside the riverbed, and we had 3 tiers of barbed wire all along the riverbed with 50-gallon drums and napalm bombs all along the riverbed with anti-personnel mines all along the riverbed. Then the Chinese came over the mountain with mules. Because of that, he opens up a book with a map. He says, "This is where you were, son." And I said to him, "Could I have a copy of it?" He said, "Well, if you write to me, I'd be glad to mail it to you." But what happened, I lost his address. So in the meantime, because of that particular incident, we recovered about a dozen mules. We had the mules for about a period of about 2 weeks. One mule was an American mule who had on his hindquarters U.S. embedded in his hindquarters. He was very, very vicious. I couldn't do anything with him. I tried to put 5 gallons of water on his back to bring it up to the ridge, you know. And
did he have a name?
No, I don't have a name for him. But he was an American mule. But I had the other mule. She was so gentle. She had a tumor, a big tumor in her hindquarters. She was so gentle, you was able to put 5 gallons of water on her back, and she would take up the ridge for you. We had the mules for about a period of 2 weeks. Then the Army made a caravan. They took them south. They took them away from us. Because of that particular incident, the Army engineers threw pontoons on the far end of the riverbed, and the Chinese floated up against the pontoons with a backhoe machine. They scooped them up and they buried it, you know. We had to bury the wounded because during the summer months, there was a stench. A stench, when the wind blew through those mountainsides, it carried. And it was just like smelling rotten eggs. The human body smells the stench. And we tried to clean the mountainsides out, you know, the wounded. We tried to do it as much as possible.
Now, is this before or after the Chinese intervention, which you're describing right now?
was during the war.
Sure, sure. I mean, but I understand that you advanced north before the Chinese intervened.
Well, we were pushed up and down 3 times. Matter of fact, I was also assigned to the 7th Division. That's where I came home from, Kumwa, which is part of the Iron Triangle. I came home from that, Kumwa. But I evidently, when I came home to the States, they sent me all these medals. I had no idea how I earned these medals until I asked them how I earned them.
4 Bronze Stars, right?
Yes. Well, each unit I supported, they were awarded a Bronze Star, and I was awarded with them, and plus the Presidential Unit Citation. So, and is there any question you want to ask me? Ask me.
Sure, of course. Well, when you were in Central North Korea during this advance, what were your daily duties like as a communications man? I understand that y'all were on the top of these mountains, and you were the link between the soldiers on the ground, the only link, and the headquarters and the officers.
Yes.
What were your daily duties like, and what were those experiences like?
Well, evidently, the artillery, the 105, 155 howitzers, they'd be on the side of the mountainside. They'd be lobbing the shells up over us, over on the other side of the mountain, you know, where the Chinese were, and the mountain would vibrate all night, constantly all night. And you knew by the sound of the artillery how close the shells were. And then what I try to tell the cadets at West Point, for every Chinese soldier, they had 3 labors to a shovel. I tried to explain to them, the fellow would stand in the middle, he would put the shovel down, and the fellow on the left would turn it to the left, then he would bring the shovel back again, and flip it to the right. And the shovel was a weave corn stalk, like a rope, and that's how, and they would dig a trench overnight around the mountainside.
Must have been unnerving to watch from a distance, making very quick progress.
Now, the half tracks looked like an army tank, but they had threads on it. And they had these big candelabra bulbs that you see at the airport would shoot the beam of light into the clouds. And the darker it was at night, the better the performance was. So what happened, they shoot the beam of light into the clouds, reflect off the clouds, and light up the whole side of the mountainside where the Chinese were in the trenches. So
was your vision, you had a pretty good vision from where you were at?
I was high. Yeah. We could see it. And anything?
What were those nights like on that mountain? And so how many people would you be with? How big was your radio team?
There's three men to a radio team.
So you and 3 men.
That's it.
Alone in the dark of the Korean War?
Now, getting provisions was very, very, very difficult. We had 3-1 rations, which consist of, you got to picture this in your mind, 3 Del Monte tomato sauce cans. I don't know if you know what they look like. And 1 we call a dry good can, which consists of 2 breaded crackers, Ritz crackers, powdered milk, powdered coffee, and a dab of jelly. The second can could be sliced peaches, sliced pears, or a fruit cocktail. The third can might be corned beef hash, Franken-American spaghetti, or 2 hamburger patties in that little can. We used to take the dry good can, scoop up the soil, the dirt, crimp the corner in, put gasoline in it, and that's how we made a sterno to heat our rations in that frigid weather.
How cold would you describe it as being?
Well, our rations were frozen, total frozen. With a can opener, we had a can opener we call, I can't think of the number of P38, we call it, open up the can opener, and it was frozen. So if you didn't heat it, the can would turn black, totally black, the outside of the can, you know, from the gas burning. And then we ate out of the can, out of the can, our rations. And now, getting water for 3 soldiers was very, very, very difficult. We had to carry 5 gallons of water on the top of the ridge. that was for drinking and washing. We will use the same soapy water in our helmet with about 3-4 days before we discard it. 5 gallons of water had last all week for 3 soldiers for drinking. We used to, during the monsoon rains, we used to wash our socks and in our helmet, and then we would put it in our waistband, and that's how we dried off our socks. During the monsoon rains.
Use your body heat to dry the socks.
The body heat to dry off.
How many nights at a time were you often alone with your radio team on the mountain, and what was that like?
Well, our radio transmitter had a little beam of light like the tip of a cigarette that shows you that you was on the air transmitting. The reason why we had a lot of fear, we had generators, and the generator made a lot of noise. We had to dismantle our generators in 2 sections, the carriage and the engine, and carry it up the mountainside with an A-frame. Then you had to carry your weapon, your field pack, and so forth. When we retreated 60 miles, the straps were cutting into my shoulders, cutting off the circulation. I would pick up the strap with one hand, hold it, and alternate one hand to the other hand. And because of that, the laborers, who were the laborers for the 6th Rock Infantry Division, would fall out of rank because the gear they were carrying was fatigued. They were tired, fatigued, and the military would butt them with the rifles to get on their feet and to keep walking. They carried the ammo, whatever they had to carry. And these are the things I observed when I was out in the military. I don't know what to say anymore.
Well, on those mountainsides at night, were ambushes frequent?
Oh, definite. Matter of fact, what happened, we very fortunate at that time. We had a squad of infantrymen on the top of our ridges, make sure the patrols wouldn't get through, knock out our radio station. And evidently, one morning, the clouds would sit down on top of the mountain, so thick and heavy that you think you'd be able to walk from one mountain to the next mountain. That's how heavy the clouds were. And this private was in his foxhole, and he was wiping off his weapon. He touched the trigger housing, and a few bursts went off, and everybody jumps out of the foxhole. And you have a Loomis badge, and I have a Loomis badge, and I could see you in the dark. You could see me in the dark, and they would translate back and forth that it was an accident. He told the sergeant that it was an accident. Because of that,
and this is a Republic of Korea soldier, an ROK soldier?
Yes,
okay.
Yes. And then the sergeant that morning called the private in front of the group of men, soldiers, and told him to bend down to touch his ankles. And with a huge stick, he whipped him 2-3 times. Because of that punishment, the sergeant sent him down the mountain 2-3 times to bring water to the top of the mountain for punishment. They were very disciplined, the military. With the 6th, not the 19th Turkish Brigade, we would have right shoulder arms like this. They have right shoulder arms the opposite way, and they had the stock up underneath their chin and the barrel down in the ankle, and the sergeant hit the bottom of the barrel, and the stock hit him in the chin, almost knocked the teeth out of his mouth.
Wow.
I told the private, I said, I would have hit that sergeant over the head with the weapon. I would have buried him. right then and there. I would never take no bullshit from them. So these are things I observed in the military.
What you know, I know you've spoken quite a bit with West Point cadets.
Yes.
If a West Point cadet asked you, or you were speaking to them about how to deal with fear in a situation where you might get ambushed, or you're finding yourself alone at night in a very foreign place, in a very dangerous time.
Yeah.
How does someone deal with that? How do you deal with?
We were supposed to have we call a rocket gun, which is like a flare gun that we shoot, and what we do towards we hear a patrol getting in, we fire towards them, light up the area where we think we see them. But we were supposed to also put trip flares all around the mountainside, but which we never did anymore. We just got tired of doing all that extra work and carrying that stuff. You know, it's not stuff you had to carry.
Yeah.
And we could carry it.
What?
So I try to tell you that if I took a bath 5 times in 1 year was a lot. And what happened, the Army engineers would come and they would throw big fire hoses into the riverbed. The river was green. The water was green, totally green. They would steam jenny the water, and it would come down to crystal clear into a vapor, and then they would put Hamilton tablets in the water, which tastes like iodine. And then it'd either be in a water trailer or a Lister bag, and that's how we got our water with 5 gallons and so forth. So this is what I observed.
When did you first hear about the Chinese intervention? Do you remember when you first heard that the Chinese intervened in the war?
Well, the Chinese, the North Koreans overran us 10-1, and they had North Koreans and the Chinese. You couldn't tell the difference between them. And evidently, like I say, when the line moved, I moved with the line.
That was a desperate time, though, wasn't it?
Yes, sure.
I mean,
we were pushed up and down 3 times, and then I don't know whether I was on a forward team or a relay team. I didn't know. We made those jumps, you know, moves. We call jumps and moves. I didn't know.
How was the morale with the soldiers after the Chinese intervention?
Well, you're on edge. You're on edge. Every day you're on edge.
Yeah.
Yep. And I'm very fortunate. I was pretty sturdy. And my father was in the military. My brother was in the military. And I thought I was not going to be a coward. I thought, stick it out.
Were you really close with your radio team? I mean, because being alone in the dark of night on those mountains and being with only 3 other men, did you develop very close relationships with them?
Oh, yes. I knew them personally.
What were their names?
One of the fellows was named Paul Jackson. Paul Jackson, he lived in Ohio. He moved from Ohio. He moved to Arizona. My wife and I talked a lot about Paul Jackson. She said, when are we going to go see him? So I called him. I wrote a letter. Well, his wife used to send me a card every Christmas, and that's how we got in touch with one another. And then what I did, we went out to Arizona, and then Paul took me on a tour of the Grand Canyon and so forth. And he talked a lot about John Wayne and everything, and movies they made out there in Arizona. And my other friend, Charlie Tenoy, he was a native of Hawaii, but American-born. And Charlie, after 35 years, running at Christmas time, I finally went to Hawaii twice to visit him. And Charlie took us all over Hawaii. When he took us to the military cemetery in this big volcano rock, the cemetery. And they had huge plaques of all the islands in the Pacific. And when I saw Korea, Charlie and I reminisced how we went up and down Korea. We had an idea where we were.
Yeah.
From that big map, I had no idea where it was. Mm-hmm.
Sounds like the bonds of being involved in those difficult situations, it's safe to say that has lasted and continued to resonate.
Now, Charlie passed away, Paul passed away, and my friend Kenny Clinchy, who, it wasn't for him, I think the Chinese would have captured me, because it was overrun and captured me in my radio station. And what happened, I lost track to Kenny Clinchy, and then my son located him, and he lived in Connecticut. The only thing I knew about Kenny, that he went to Manhattan College. He was an accountant, and what happened when I finally located him, he lived in Connecticut. And I tried to locate him. He lived in Yonkers, and no one knew who he was. And I kept asking all the neighbors, and they didn't know who he was, until my son located his wife, who lived in Connecticut. I called her up, Virginia, and she told me Kenny passed away. They were supposed to go to Ireland to visit, and evidently they were in a shopping mall, and he went to the men's department, she went to the ladies' department. Then they called him on the radio, Mrs. Clinchy, and he died with a massive heart attack in the shopping mall. That's all I know. But I'm looking forward to go to Connecticut and spend some time with Mrs. Clinchy and their family. I hope to take them out to dinner.
Well, how did he prevent you from being captured by the Chinese? What happened in particular in that case?
Well, what happened when the Chinese broke through, I think he was one jump ahead of me, you know what I mean? And then what happened, like we retreated. We walked 2.5 days by foot, carrying our weapon, our radio equipment, which was 55 pounds, plus our field pack, and walking and sleeping at the same time for 2.5 days without stopping, no sleep, no.
What type of experiences did you have with Korean citizens? I know you've spoken in the past about some of the stories and some of the individuals you came in contact with.
Well, the Korean people, for instance, they're hard-working people, and evidently, one day, I heard a cow echoing through the mountainside. And I put my field glasses on. I look down through the village. I see no movement, but I hear this cow mooing, and echoing through the whole mountainside. So I came off the mountain. I approached this village, and there's the cow in the center of the room, staked in the center of the room. They had corn stalks all around on the outside that she fed off, thinking they'd come back to get the cow, you know. But they never came back to their homeland, these people. Another time, I approached the village, and I looked on, the road was a dirt road, dry with clay, but on the side of the road was a lot of crevices in the ground. I couldn't understand why there was crevices in the ground. So what I did, I dug it up with a shovel, and what they did, they buried huge crocks of rice in the ground. They put a stone, and when the monsoon rains came, it fermented and raised the stone, and that's where the crevices came out of the ground. So these are things I observed. Another time, I approached this village, and a woman, she was in bed, moaning, and she had a cow skin over her body. What happened, they left her behind. Eventually, I assume that she died there because the weather was frigid cold. Frigid cold, was no heat. So this is what I observed with the peasants.
And the food situation was desperate, right?
Yes. Desperate, yes. They would dig up where the military was. They'd be digging up and washing off the food and boil it over and eat it. If they were near a group of military men, and they threw any food away.
How did your experiences with Koreans differ as you went north? I mean, if there were citizens along the road in the south, you said, constantly looking for food. When you went north, did you have it did the North Korean citizens just stay away from American soldiers whatsoever? Did you have interaction with Koreans north of what would later become the DMZ?
No,
Not at all.
Only thing I had, for instance, with a peasant had an oxen who was plowing the field with an oxen, and the plow was this big, huge stone as a wedge that they would plow the soil, and he would call to the oxen, "Ho, ho!" and it would draw it. I said, "Let me try it." So I got behind the oxen, and I went, "Hoi, hoi!" and he didn't even budge. He didn't recognize my voice. So these are things I experienced. And then they had mills. They had a mill that they would have a mule go around in a circle, and this huge stone would come down and mash the rice, and make it into like a flour, you know? Mm-hmm. I noticed that too. And then they had water buckets, you know, like a water wheel. They run the mill with the water. If you didn't have an oxen, the water would turn and the stone would come down and mash the rice in buckets.
Did you develop friendships with any of the Republic of Korea soldiers, or were you not serving?
No, just in the 6th Rocket Infantry Division. I was told not to eat their food, but you get so tired eating rations without eating a hot meal. And I would eat, they had rice with scallions, rice with horse chestnuts, rice with kernels of corn, and that was a delicacy to me, but it was different from what I was eating. But I had a case of dysentery that I wouldn't wish on a dog, because what they did, they would take the water out of the riverbed. It was not purified, where our body was not immune to their water. I talked to the cadets at West Point. Every ration that we have, you have one napkin. That napkin you have to save. That napkin was your toilet paper. That's what I tell the cadets. You have to save it. So we used to save it in the helmet.
At this point in the conflict, you know, moving up and down the Korean Peninsula in the face of the Chinese and North Korean army, what do you think about the war in general? I mean, were you focused on surviving and doing your job, or did you and your other soldiers talk about the war and what it meant in the larger scheme of things?
Well, the only time you sleep was during the daytime. We didn't sleep at night. All the movement was done at night. At night. That's when most of the movement was at night, not during the day.
Mm-hmm. So, during that conflict, I understand that you suffered from malaria and frostbite as well.
I had both my feet frozen in the sleeping bag. After 50 years, I went down to VA hospital, and I had an infection in my left ear. And the young girl said to me, "Mr. Rabasco, you need a new ID card." And I showed it to her. I have one in my wallet. I said, "I showed it to you." Oh, she says, "That's obsolete. The old one used to have our picture with our Social Security on the face of the card. The new one has your picture with a barcode." So she says to me, "You go upstairs right now. The young girl's going to take your picture." So I went up there and I saw the young girl. I said to her, "You see my old ID card?" She says, "Yes." I said, "You see my picture?" She says, "Yes." "You see the writing underneath my name? I want that printed on the new ID card." She looked at it. She says, oh, you are service connected?" I said to her, "You see the shoes I got on? Uncle Sam gives me these shoes," I told her. She said, "Right after I take your picture, you're going to go upstairs right now and talk to the contact man." So I went upstairs, I spoke to him. "What's your name? What's your Social Security number?" and vice versa. A week or 2 weeks later, I got a letter through the mail. "I want you to be examined by a medical doctor." 2 weeks went by. I get a letter through the mail. "I want you to have x-rays taken." 2 weeks goes by, I get a letter through the mail. I want you to be reevaluated by another medical doctor. Now, a month went by, and I get a folder, an 8x10 folder through the mail, and I said to the contact man, what is this figure that's on here? Oh, yes, he says, son, you're going to receive that through the mail. And I said to him, is that retroactive?
This is for your frostbite.
Yes. He said, no, that's permanent. I said to him, oh, boy. I said, this is more than my Social Security.
So the frostbite, did it affect you in the years to come as far as pain? I mean, in your feet?
Well, my feet are always wet. They're constantly wet. All the skin cells are damaged. My left foot, my big toe has no, how'd you say, it doesn't sit proper in the shoes. It kicks up in the air. The nerve is damaged. The nerve is damaged. Yes.
Now, with the malaria affected you for some years to come after the war too, right?
For the first 3 years in a row, I came home. I would have a recurrence of malaria. I went down to the VA hospital, and they used to ice pack me with ice and alcohol. Then it got to the point, my mother used to do it at home for me because I didn't want to go there. And once you're there, they put you on the battery test, and they taking needles here, drawing blood, and they're trying to trace the thing and see where it is in your spinal column, so forth. And that's why I had my mother ice pack me. I wouldn't go. They put you on a battery. Needles, oh boy, a lot of needles.
And you were sent to Tokyo. You were evacuated out of South Korea for the malaria, right, during the war?
Yes. Well, there I goofed off. I goofed off in the military service. Yes.
What happened?
Well,
if you don't mind me asking.
What happened? What happened? The orderly, which is the male nurse. Oh, what happened? There was a tall fellow like you. He was going in and out the hospital with crutches. And I said, pal, let me go to town for once. So I put on his uniform, put on his shoes, and I went to town. Now, the orderly reported me to the doctor that I was not in my bed. And when I came back to the hospital, the next morning the doctor walked up to me, says, soldier, I see you're feeling much better. So in 3 days, they put me on a plane and sent me back to the front lines again.
Oh, God. How did the Korean War come to an end for you? When did you find out you were going home?
Well, I had enough points to come home. I had 34 points. They had a point system there. And evidently, when I was in Kumwa, my cousin wrote me a letter, and she told me her boyfriend was in Kumwa, Gene Joyce, at that time. And what happened, I went down to meet him, and he asked me, hey, Bosco, how long have you been here? I said, well, I got enough points to go home for rotation, I says, and just a question of time. But because of my MOS, they froze me another winter there. I spent 2 winters there. But the second winter, we had better clothing, where the first winter we didn't have the proper clothes. For instance, during the summer months, we would take our poncho, lay it on the ground, and sleep on top of it with our sleeping bag. Going around the summer months, they finally gave us air mattresses, that you were sleeping on an air mattress, not on the ground, sleeping on a poncho on the ice and snow. Yes.
Imagine that was a luxury in terms of
yes,
conditions getting better.
Much better, yes.
Yeah.
And then we had better jackets, coats, which were much warmer, Where the coats that we had were made for that frigid weather.
What was it like coming home?
Well, it's very hard coming back home. All my friends were married, and you had to start a whole new life all over again. And I couldn't get adjusted sleeping indoors in my bedroom. I slept in an open porch. My mother said, you're going to freeze. I said, no, I'm not going to freeze. It was like claustrophobia. I couldn't go inside to sleep indoors. I couldn't sleep indoors. I had to sleep outside in the porch. Even though it was cold, I was used to it. Yeah.
How long did, say, ramifications of the conflict with your own self last? I mean, did you find the war affecting you many years later?
Well,
were you able...
yeah, it does affect you. You know, it is, and when I came back home, I tried to go back to work. I thought I was working, but I was not working. I was fumbling. I couldn't get the momentum, working with the tools again. I was working, but not working the way I should be working. It took me a couple of years to actually shake it off, you know, build up that momentum again, working with the tools again. Your mind is always wandering.
What's the legacy of your service? If you were speaking to cadets, I mean, if you had to speak very succinctly about the meaning of your service or about the meaning...
When I went to Israel, all the military, boys and girls are all in the military. And I think here in the United States, everybody should be in the military. This way they know what a foot soldier does for his country and what to expect from him. And it's a shame when I came home, my friends I went to school with, they said, Bosco, why don't you apply with the telephone company? There was an opening for you. And what I did, I went and I applied. At that time, there was discrimination. I felt hurt. They didn't hire me. If I was Irish, I would have had the job, but I was not Irish. And I felt hurt. Then, when I wanted to buy my first piece of property, I sent to Washington, D.C. My documentation, and they sent me a war bond that I was eligible for to get a loan from Uncle Sam. At that time, the banks was 5%, and a GI loan was 3.5%. I went down, my friend I went to school with, Donald Hahn, said, Bosco, I got to tell you the truth. We're not giving out the loans to the vets. We want a higher percentage, 5%. So I took the thing, and I ripped it up, and I threw it away. I was very unhappy. I couldn't get the loan from the bank. Mm-hmm. Yes. So I talk about myself as an individual.
You've had a long...
And then my friend, he was going to school. Hey, Bosco, why don't you come to BOCES with me? They pay you $10 for each night you go there, once a week. I said, I'll come with you, Jerry. Now, Jerry was in the Marine Corps. I went to apply. No, it says, no, your time limitation's over. You're with the World War II. This is now the Korean veterans from 53 on. And they wouldn't accept me. All this garbage.
Oh. How did you've spoken about the value of your service and how if young men and women served in America that they would have a greater appreciation for the contribution of veterans. How did the war shape your career as an electrician? Because I understand, have had a very long and successful career with your own business.
Well, I've been in the electrical industry over 65 years. I got my master's license. I was 22 years old when I just came out of the Army. I went to school down 149th Street in San Gompers. I went to school down 14th Street, Delhi Henty Institute. I took my New York City exam. So I've been self-employed over 40 years. What happened, the city of Mount Vernon took over my shop. They tore all the houses down on condemnation. And what happened, I went into a factory where I was paying rent. And then my wife said to me, why are you killing yourself? Why are you working so hard for? Why don't you slow down? And then I applied as an electrical inspector. I've been an electrical inspector over 25 years, which I enjoy. I'm still working today. as electrical inspector. And I get help from my friends. So, aren't you retired? I said, I don't want to hear the word retire. I'm happy what I'm doing. I'm talking to you, talk to electricians, I talk to architects, engineers, lawyers, homeowners. I'm happy what I'm doing. So when the good Lord tells me to lay down, then I'll lay down.
It has been such a pleasure to speak with you today, and I really appreciate you taking the time. And I think that's a good place to stop. I hope maybe we can pick this up again in the future.
Yes, I'm looking forward that whatever I talked about, if I left anything out, if you could refresh my memory, I'll be glad to tell you.
Is there any other stories that you would want to tell that you'd written down that you'd like to look real quick?
You want me?
Would you like to?
I would like to.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead. We have
all right. General, let me.
Mr. Rabasco, I understand there were a few more stories you'd like to share. If you'd like to go ahead, we'd love to hear them.
Well, I'm going to mention about one day I heard a dog screeching. I couldn't understand why the dog, I figured, was hurt. And I put my field glasses on, and I looked down the mountainside, and I seen these two peasants, and I had no idea what they were doing. When I came off the foot of the mountain, I seen them, they were choking the dog. And what they did, they put the dog over a burning fire, stones, and with a stick they were scraping the fur off the dog. And then they took the dog and they laid it inside this big pail with water and boiling water where they cooked the dog, and they cooked the dog with entails and all, and they ate the dog. The people had no food, and they captured this dog and they killed it. Another time,
you made good friends with another animal in particular, though, didn't you? In your sleeping bag.
Yes. One day we had long johns, and I thought it was the hair on my legs that were irritating me. So I put my hand down in the sleeping bag and I scratched my ankle a few times, not realizing when I zipped the bag open, out came a field mouse. Well, evidently we became friends, him and I. Every night he would come out and the little beam of light that was on my radio transmitter, I would take my rations, the crackers in my rations, and break them, and I would put them down. He would come, pick them up, and run away. He'd come back again, until one morning I found him in my helmet liner in the soapy water. He drowned, and we became friends for a short time.
Did he have a name?
No, I didn't have a name, but he had sparkling eyes. Another time, I was on top of this mountain ridge, and I seen this fellow calling, "Hey boys, come over here, waving to us." I had no idea who it was. It turned out to be a deacon, a priest. I have no idea what he was. He says, "Boys, would you like to receive Mass?" Of course, he says, "Yes." He says, "I don't care what religion you boys are, you pray the way you want to pray. But he says, remember, boys, there's no such thing that you cannot eat meat on Friday. You don't know today's your last meal." I don't know how he got up to the top of that mountain. I don't know how he got off the foot of that mountain, but I'll never forget that.
Sounds like it was a special moment.
Yes. And can you hold off for a second?
Bosco, what have been your experiences with Korean War veteran associations since the conflict?
Well, our chapter was invited to go to Fox Meadow School, and evidently I thought I was talking to male and female, and they would be interested in hearing from veterans. But it just seems that the group that we were talking to, they had flip-flops on their feet. They were dressed with a tie, with a dress. They had their belly exposed and so forth. And I looked at them and I couldn't understand why I was there talking to these people. And I was very disappointed. And I talked to them for 1 hour, and I found out they were going as a group to Washington, D.C., but they were a group that was a problem group, boys and girls. And that's why we lectured to them. I had no idea. but I was very unhappy. But generally when I go talk to a group like West Point cadets, they listen, and they give you a letter of appreciation. They give you a card thanking you. You eat with the cadets in the mess hall, 20 minutes. And to me, it's an honor. It's an honor being there with them, talking to them. A lot of veterans I talk to, they say they're Korean veterans, and the minute you talk to them and you tell them when you were there, they lie to you. They are veterans, but they're not combat veterans. They maybe were in the States. I tell my sons there's a difference between a combat veteran and a veteran. When a fellow tells me they're in the Navy or the Air Force, it's a different story. Total different story. They have a roof over their head, they have electricity, they have heat, they have hot water, they have a hot meal. When you don't have this, and you're sleeping on the ice and snow like an animal, and survival is unbearable, and you talk to yourself, you're saying to yourself, what am I supposed to do? Why I'm here? Why I'm taking all this punishment for? And then you try to explain to these boys and girls, they should be in the military. They know what a foot soldier is against, and they'll appreciate them more.
When you came back to the United States after the war and in the decades since, how have your interactions been with just civilians? Do they know about the war in your experience? Have people been interested in?
They took it for granted. They take it for granted, you know. And you're nobody. You're nobody. Mm-hmm.
Wow. The conflict's so interesting in the sense that it's often referred to, as this forgotten war, and it was such a moment of huge significance in the 20th century, undoubtedly. And we really value you sitting down with us today, and this is a great story of yours, these different stories to be able to share with cadets.
Yes. I think it makes a man out of you. You realize how much you depend on your folks, your family. You appreciate them more. We European people, we have family value. When I went down south, a lot of these boys, they live down there, they don't go visit their family. I said, I don't understand it. Why don't you go see your folks? Where I would be happy to go home, see my folks.
What did your parents think about your service in Korea? Were they very happy to see you join the Army?
No, my father didn't want me to go into the military because he suffered the same thing like I did. When he was in the military in World War I, he had all machine gun fire on his neck and shoulder.
Was this with the United States? Or I know he was an Italian immigrant.
Italian Army, yeah. And when he was up in Austria, yeah.
Did you feel maybe a new sense of being able to bond with your dad when you got back, that you kind of had an understanding of kind of what war is like?
He realized what he went through. He didn't want me to go.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, all right.
Well, thank you for speaking with us today.
I like to hear, but I'm very happy that I was able to share with you and the cadets, whoever, and if they want to write to me and call me, I'll be glad to talk to them.
Great.